Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session. And today we've got a super interesting topic all about negotiations. We've got an expert in order to help us go through all of that. Now, you're going to need negotiations in every single stage of your property development journey. Whilst we are trading property as our little widget, we're engaging with people, whether they be sales agents, whether they be vendors, whether they be our architects, builders, and the like. We're engaging with people the whole way. And so negotiations is a super, super important part of a tool that you need in your kit bag. So in order to talk through this, our expert of today is Nicole Davidson from Nicole Davidson Negotiations. Does what it says on the tin, Nicole. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Rob. It's absolutely lovely to be here. And yes, we keep things simple in the naming context.
Very good. Look, tell us a little bit about who you are and your background, your experience, and why we should be listening to you today on this very important topic.
I love it. I love that question too, because the reason why is so important in negotiation. So I am a negotiation expert, to whatever that word means. And I guess in terms of why I do what I do and how I came to do it, it's quite I'm going to give you the very short version because it's quite a long story, but effectively, I am a qualified lawyer who didn't want to be in the law and stayed in the law for a very short period of time. I worked in commercial insolvency and investment banking, where I was connected to the law a little bit, but looking at things from a much more practical and commercial perspective. After doing that all for about 10 years, I moved into learning and development because I was much more interested in the human nature and those delightful soft skills that we talk about. And eventually moved into a role where I was going in to teach negotiation. So I worked for a training consultancy, and it was where I really found my passion. I absolutely loved the theory of negotiation and the things that I learned when I was starting to teach people. And I thought about how powerful it would have been if someone had taught me that stuff back when I was doing investment banking and insolvency and law and all of those things. So 8 years ago, I set up my business. And what I do is work with people in three different ways around negotiation. So firstly, I train them. So I give them the skills that they need so that they're ready when they need them. And I teach in the areas of negotiation and conflict resolution. Secondly, I work with people to assist them on their specific negotiations. So I come in as a negotiation advocate, working alongside them. They have the property that they have the subject matter expertise, so they might know their area and what's going on. I bring the negotiation strategy. So I always say in that sort of work, it's people who are losing sleep at night, going, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? This is so important. I need to get it right. If you're losing sleep, then that's where I come in. The final aspect of where I work in the negotiation side of things is in the dispute area. And that's where I come in as a mediator to help resolve disputes. Sometimes that's when it's got to the level of being in court already. People are already spending big dollars going through the legal system. And the courts will generally require mediation as part of that process. Even better, I think, is if the parties come and try to mediate things before it gets to that stage. So I'm the neutral umpire, if you like, making everyone play nicely and trying to get to some sensible outcomes.
Very good. Very good. So we're in good, safe, capable hands today. So let's, I guess, try to, sorry, still unwell. I'm going to try not to go into a coughing fit here. Let's kind of break it down into a couple of different elements. There's getting ready to go into a conversation or a negotiation. Then there's actually being in the middle of it, and then there's the aftermath. If we didn't quite get it right, and how do we actually go and clean up? Is there any other stages that I've kind of missed in that?
Look, I think that's absolutely right. It is those three key stages. The only other thing I'd say, though, is that aftermath is also about how do we clean up if we haven't got it right, but also how do we up our skills so that we do it better next time? And every negotiation that we do is an opportunity to reflect and learn so that we are better at the next one. It's a lifelong skill.
I would say that in every realm of everything that we do, we should always go back and reflect. Set your intentions, folks, and then go back and measure whether or not you actually got that right, because often, at least for me, that is not the case. So get slightly better every day is my goal. Okay, so the 3 stages. Now, when we were, I guess, getting ready to go on air, you talked about there's actually 7 elements. So I think you called them the Harvard 7 elements model. What are the 7 elements that go into a negotiation?
Yeah, so I'll go through that. I think just before I do, it'd be great just to reiterate the importance of preparation can't be understated. And in fact, there's, I often quote the fact that 80% of your success will come from the preparation that you do before the negotiation. And one of the reasons is we talked about those 3 stages. There's the preparation, there's the in the moment, and then the after. The in the moment, the more preparation you do, the less you have what I call the deer in the headlight moments, where something happens in that negotiation that you hadn't considered and you're suddenly like, oh my God, how do I react to this? And chances are you'll react from a place of stress, which might not be the best place to be. So I cannot say how important it is to prepare. Now, the 7 elements model is a great model to help give you a really clear strategy around that preparation. It comes from reviewing hundreds of negotiations, and what they found, this was done back in the 80s, it does not matter what the context of your negotiation is. There are 7 things that are going to drive each negotiation. So what are they? The very quick rundown is the 7 are: there's relationship. How are we connecting with the other person in the negotiation? Communication. Are we actually understanding each other? It sounds simple. It's way harder than it sounds. Interests, which is what are the real drivers for the parties in the negotiation? And we talk about it's not the what they want, it's why do they want it? What does it ultimately give them? We then have options, which are all the possible things that could be agreed to in a negotiation. Some options might be really favourable to one party, some options might be really favourable to the other. But there's going to be a huge number, and we want to try and find options that create as much value as possible for both parties. We then have standards, which is how do we assess all of these options? What's the basis that we work out what is fair and reasonable, or what is something that should be agreed to? So in the property sector, we're talking about things like valuations. We're talking about costs of what stamp duty might be, what planning fees might be based on previous experience. We then move into looking at another of the elements, which is alternatives. And that basically says you cannot go into a negotiation without understanding, if you didn't come to a resolution with this negotiation partner, how would you meet your interests somewhere else? And really important to know, not just for yourself, but for the other person, how strong those alternatives are, because they play a really important part in knowing who's got the strongest position in the negotiation. And then the final of the 7 elements is commitment, which is about the promises that we make, not just at the end of the negotiation, but throughout the process as well.
Perfect. So that's a good wrap up of the 7 elements. What I'd like to try and do now is, using those 3 phases, look at the 7 elements and go, what can we do within each of those phases in and around those? Because I can see in some of those phases, some of those elements are going to have a lot more power or a lot more impact, and also help you to set yourself up for the next phase a little bit better. So the pre-stage, relationships stage, at this point, we don't know them at all. So from a preparation perspective, I can tell you some of the things that I do, but I'll Google them. I'll look on their Facebook page. I'll look on their LinkedIn profiles and all those sorts of things. I'm trying to work out who they are before they turn up. I will look on my sales research tool to understand, are they an owner occupier? Are they an investor? Are they renting it out? I want to know everything about this person that I can garnish just from that superficial layer, so that when I go in, I at least have something to hopefully build some rapport with. Do they like fishing? Do they like sport? Have they got family, kids, grandkids? anything that I can find in that regard gives me a conversation starter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you can add to that? Because clearly you're better at this than me.
Look, I think the thing that I would add, and I think they're all very sensible things to be doing, because you need to understand, but the next step is to take that and go, based on that information that I now have about this person, what are some of the assumptions that they might be making around this negotiation? And so I always say relationship is actually based on the assumptions that we make about each other. And I point out, you mentioned, Rob, you don't actually know this person at this point, but you will have a relationship with them based around the assumptions that you make based on that information that you've gathered. So I always say, bring it back to something much more simple. If I'm going to get on the phone to the customer service person at, let's pick on Optus today, the way that I connect with that person will be vastly different if my previous experience of dealing not only with Optus customer service, but my power company customer service and various other people, if I've always had positive experiences and they've been really helpful, the way I approach that negotiation will be quite different to if every previous experience has been a negative one where I've had to come back multiple times and escalate and all of that. So based on the context of what we learn, we're going to be making assumptions that will impact how we go into this negotiation. So I want to be thinking about, well, if I've learnt these facts about this person, what assumptions am I actually making based on those facts? And be really conscious about it, because normally assumptions happen at such a subconscious level. They're just there and they're having an impact without us even knowing. So I want to dig down to go, okay, so what am I assuming here? And then if I'm actually aware of those assumptions, the risk, of course, with assumptions is that they're wrong, that this person is different to the norm. And so I can be really aware of what assumptions I'm making, and I can be testing those when I actually come into the conversation. But I think the other thing to think about is also what assumptions, it's all well and good me doing my research on them, but they will also be making assumptions about me.
Absolutely.
Okay. And now this is something where I want to be aware of. So I need to look at, who am I? What is my age? What is my gender? What is my experience? What is my profession? What assumptions might that be driving in the other person? And if I think the assumptions that that's driving are negative, so say that I come in and, maybe I walk in and depending, this is going to be very stereotyped, but imagine I'm coming into a negotiation with a vendor who is a much older, quite conservative male, and I come in and I'm younger and female. The assumption might be, oh, she's a woman, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Very stereotypical, and hopefully not happening as often as it used to. But I might need to think about, well, that's not necessarily a helpful assumption for that person to have about me. What can I drop into the conversation, or what can I do to change their perspective of who I am, so that we've got some helpful assumptions going on?
Well, there's also the preparation before the preparation. So the same way that we were doing all the Googling on them, almost certainly they're going to be doing that on us. So what is our digital footprint? And what is that telling the world about who we are and what we do? Am I Rob the evil developer, or am I Rob the friendly next door neighbor that's engaged in the community? What has your digital footprint? What is that telling people? If you've had somebody have negative reviews on you or things like that, they're going to find that the same way that that we're going to find information about them. So clean up your backyard before you actually go into something like this. Maybe do things like
important.
Set up, update your LinkedIn profiles, be more professional on your Facebook pages. Have a website that actually says what you do, so that people actually can find the version of you that you want them to find.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were saying about that, and not in a property development context, but I met with a lawyer recently who I got along with really well. But after I met him, I then went and checked his LinkedIn, and he had some very strong views on some fairly controversial issues, but they were views that were very negative in my opinion, and it totally changed my opinion. Now, if I'd found that before I met him, it would have been a very difficult meeting, I think. But yes, that what you say in the public domain is so important.
Yeah, so we've only touched on one of the 7 elements here. There's
We have.
another 6 to
How
go.
long have we got?
How long's a piece of string? We can take as long as we want. Next one, communication. So we're still in preparation phase. When we find a little bit about their digital footprint or whatever research that we've got, using those assumptions, we might form an opinion on, look, are they a blue collar worker? Are they, I guess, a white collar worker? What kind of language might we use? You know, how can we start to articulate our issues and challenges? And we might form that view up front. As you said before, it's an assumption and we could be completely wrong. But knowing that and trying to go, well, if they are a blue collar worker, should I address appropriately? And you know, if they're a white collar worker, should I address appropriately? Just so that when we turn up, we've actually got something in common and just they feel at ease.
Yeah, so I think absolutely that's part of our preparation. That's where the preparation, you know, communication crosses over with relationship in that way. So thinking about, you know, what kind of language do I want to use? You know, if I'm a background where I understand all the technical terms around property, and you know, there's things that I might use in my language with somebody in my industry, that if I'm going in and if it is, say, a blue collar worker, I might want to be a bit conscious about that. It might be that they're blue collar, but they've actually had engagement in this before. So it's going in with a curiosity, I guess, as to what that might mean. The other piece, though, around preparing for communication is, as you go through preparing all of the other 6 elements, you're preparing not from your own perspective only, but you're also preparing from the other sides. And what you do when you're coming through that is you come up with a whole lot of questions. So in terms of preparing communication, what I'm also doing is noting down the questions that I've got that come up throughout my preparation, so that I don't get to a point where I've agreed something where there's questions that were important that I haven't noted. So it gives you a bit of a checklist for when you're in that conversation. So you can say, I don't want to actually even start getting to let's do a deal until I've got this information for these questions. And on the flip side, it might be, as I do my preparation about my own perspective, there are certain messages that I really want to get through to the other side. And so I'm going to keep a little checklist of those, so that once again, we don't get to that piece about actually getting to agreement without being really sure that I've communicated everything that's important. And that might be things about, you know, what you're planning to do with the property. It might be things about who you are as a person and how you like to work with people. It's going to depend on the circumstances, but it's easy once you start a conversation to get sidetracked, and these important things can just sort of drop off the edge.
Yeah, and we might touch on this a little bit later. So I'm going to put a pin drop in this, but people communicate in different ways. Some people are very fast thinkers and they want to make decisions really fast. They can do that with minimal information. Other people need all the facts and they need to take their time and deliberate and that sort of thing. So in the preparation stage, you don't know who you're dealing with. So if you don't go in knowing all the facts and all the different things that could go wrong and all the different permutations, when you turn up to a meeting, you don't know how much detail you have to provide. So over prepare rather than under prepare. And if you are fortunate enough to get somebody who just wants the facts and move on, then your conversation goes faster, but you don't want to be caught short.
Yeah, you'd rather do the preparation and not need it than not do it and need it, and it all goes pear-shaped.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. Trying not to die here.
I just thought that was our little soundbite in between elements.
That's okay.
Off at the each of each section.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. Next, interests. What are some of the things now in the interest perspective? I guess there's wants and needs. So we often get the superficial answer of what somebody is wanting, which sometimes has nothing to do with the actual need that they actually need to solve. And I personally find that if I can get to the core of their needs, quite often their wants will actually just drop away and fall away.
Yeah. And that's because what actually happens is often when you ask somebody what they want, they will give you not their interest, but they'll give you an option. So you might come in to approach a vendor and say, what's important to you here? And they say, well, I need to sell this property for $1 million and I need to close the deal in 30 days. That's not interests, it's an option because it's one of the things you could agree to in the negotiation. So the questions that I want to ask then is to understand what's really driving that. And if you think about interests, it's going to be, there's a range of things we need to think about. One is the sort of very tangible things. So we all know in property, two of the key interests that will almost always be in play is time and money, and probably in the other order. So people have an interest in money, but what is that interest really representing? Is it about a specific need for that money? I need to sell this because I've got to pay down my mortgage. The bank's about to foreclose. Is it the money represents fairness? Is it greed? And I think that often comes up, I want $1 million. Well, where is the basis? Well, that's just because, I've heard that property prices have gone through the roof. I want to take my chunk. Is it an emotional issue? Is it actually, I want fairness? Is it that I want to preserve my ego? I don't want to tell people what I sold my property for and somebody goes, oh, you got ripped off, mate. So we really need to understand interests, which are those sort of tangible, the intangible, or the psychological. So there's almost always an aspect of ego, fairness, respect. Respect is a really important interest for people, and that's one that doesn't often cost us money. It's an easy thing to add value to in the negotiation. And then we're looking also, when we look at the more tangible ones, sometimes it's the short-term versus the long-term interests. And once again, what you might find is people might disclose a little bit, but they're only going to give you a section of those interests. Sometimes that's because they haven't actually explored it themselves. They know what they want, but they've never actually taken the time to sit down and ask why. So if you can ask why in the negotiation, but that's jumping ahead because we're planning at the moment. At the moment, all we can do is make some assumptions about what their interests might be so that we've got some questions that we can ask them in the negotiation. But we need to unpack our own interests because that's where the flexibility comes from when our preferred option is not one that they accept.
Yeah, and so you've listed a number in there. And there's a couple that I don't typically use, which is the ego, fairness, and I always treat them with respect. So that's always there. But from a preparation perspective, I tend to concentrate on 4 elements. So time and money, as you touched on, but risk. Some people don't want to take any risk at all. Some people are willing to take all the risk. So that would they be interested in a joint venture, for example, and share the risk and share the rewards? Other people are just no way at all. Some people need certainty. They need to know that there's an outcome. And that is by far their biggest driver. So for me, time, money, risk, and certainty are the 4 drivers that I'm trying to understand for someone. And then there's the permutations of that where you said short and long term. So for example, they might need some money urgently, but they can wait for the rest.
Yeah.
So maybe they've got some medical procedures, or maybe they're behind on their mortgage and they might only need $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, but they need it today. And if we can solve that problem, then it buys you the time that you need for the rest.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to do in a preparation stage when you're just kind of randomly searching. But if there's an agent involved or something like that, then you might be able to ask some of those questions of the agent before you actually get to sit down at the table.
Yeah, and this is where, once again, if I go back to the preparation on the relationship side, what you've pointed out is you actually need to understand all of the players in the negotiation. And that's a really important factor of it, is to actually go, okay, well, it's not generally just one person. There are often agents in these negotiations. Sometimes it's spouses. Sometimes if you've got an elderly vendor, it might be family. And so trying to figure out who are all of the different players, and they will all have, just to add complexity, they'll all have different driving interests.
Yeah. So
So you can see it gets quite messy quite quickly.
Yeah, gatekeepers and decision makers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and influencers. So the influencer might not have the ability to make the decision or the power to make the decision, but they may have a huge amount of influence in that outcome.
Absolutely. Anyone the decision maker relies on for advice and information is someone you need to understand and work with.
Yeah. Okay, so then I guess we're still only 3 into the stack of 7 at the moment. Options. So, and not options in the property development sense,
No.
but because an option is an option here, but what are the different ways the deal could actually be carved out? What are the things that we might want to think about, the different permutations? One of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of people make in our community is they only go in with one option in mind, and that's what they want. And they don't think at all about all the other different permutations that might also work because they've got this preconceived idea of what they need to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that problem often arises as well because people haven't taken a deep look at their own interests. Because once you've done the preparation around interests, both yours and the assumptions of what the others can be, you've actually got a checklist to say, what's something I can add into the deal to deal with each of these interests? So you might have a preferred option. And even when you look at that, you might go, actually, that doesn't deal with a couple of my interests. So you've now got a way of going, what can I add into this to manage that? But you also have to start thinking about what might come up on the other side. So I always say when I'm preparing for a negotiation, I really want to brainstorm as many options as possible. And some of those will be favorable to me. Some of them will be favorable to the other side, and I would never agree to them. And it's like, well, if I'm never going to agree to them, why do I even need to think of them in the first place? And this comes back to this concept of avoiding the deer in the headlight moment, because if I know that they might put some options on the table that are unfavorable to me and that I wouldn't accept, I've also had a chance to think about how I'll respond.
Absolutely.
And so that's where being as broad as you can, thinking about all of the different things. And then when we come to talk about the negotiation itself, I think there's a real skill in how do you respond to an option that you don't like in a way that is productive. So don't forget to let me talk about that when we get to that.
Yeah. Then we've got so there's lots of different I guess options. So I teach 7 low and no money down strategies, but there's also just traditional purchasing in how you actually go and acquire it. So it could be under contract, could be joint ventures, could be option contracts, could be all sorts of things. So think about all of the different ways that deal could actually be structured and know which ones are acceptable to you. You're going to have a hierarchy of the preferred approach, but you should also know how far down the stack you're willing to go and still have a workable outcome because it's got to work for both sides. Otherwise, if it only works for one side, there is no deal.
So true. So true.
Next, standards. So here I think we're talking about what's the research that we can do to prepare to justify whatever I'll say arguments, but whatever positions that we want to take. So have we done what is the median price for the property in the area? Have we seen what other developers have actually achieved as comparables to be able to say this is what's going to happen? Because I can almost guarantee you're going to sit down and they go, Johnny down the road, he sold it for $2 bazillion. So I think I should get 2.5 because my property is bigger and badder. And so you need to be able to justify Johnny's property and why it's nothing like this one.
Yeah. Or even if you go to the database, actually what Johnny told you he sold it for wasn't actually what he sold it for at all, because who's ever lied about what they sold their property for?
No one.
So standards really it's the data part, and it's about justifying the various things that are put forward. So this is really where you'd need to do your research. And we know when we talk about influencing people, we can influence them because the solution that we're proposing is good for them, i.e. it meets their interests. Some people, that's all they need. and they don't care about the data as long as it meets their interests. But we know there's different personality types. Other people are also going to want to know that it's the right thing. And so they're going to need some data to back that up. So that's about things like your valuations, your median prices. It's about things like how do you justify your reputation that you're actually going to be able to do what you say you do. So testimonials and things like that come in as some of the standards. It's about examples of where this might have worked before. So it's really having everything that you need to say, look, this is not just me telling you that this is a good idea, but here's other things, and ideally other things from other people where it's a bit more objective to back up the fact that what I'm saying actually does make sense.
Yep. Alternatives. How are alternatives different to options?
Options. Great question, because in everyday life, options and alternative, it's the same word. When I talk about negotiation and the 7 elements model, options and alternatives are quite different. So options, just going back to that, are things that myself and my negotiating counterpart can agree to as part of a deal. When I talk about alternatives, I'm looking at what happens if this deal doesn't go ahead. So I'm saying I've got a whole set of interests that I am trying to meet. If I can't do a deal with this person to meet those interests, what other alternatives are available to me? So in a property development context, I'm negotiating with this vendor for this purchase of a property. What other properties are around? How else can I make money? Ultimately, my goal in going to property development is to make money. And get some financial security. So my alternatives, see, even I get them mixed up sometimes. My alternatives are actually endless. I could look at other properties that I could develop. I could look at investing in the stock market. I could look at getting into some sort of managed fund or something. I could just leave my money in the bank.
Yeah.
So what we want to make sure that we're doing is looking at the alternatives that are going to meet our interests. And we come up with a concept that we call our BATNA. Now, BATNA's the only piece of negotiation jargon I typically use. I'm sure you know what it is, Rob.
Best alternative, something, yes.
The best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so in each case, there'll be a whole range of different things that we might do to meet our interests. One of them, or sometimes a combination of doing a few different things in tandem, will be our BATNA, or our best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And the important thing that we need to know is, what is our BATNA? Because if the other side can't offer us something that meets our interests at least as well as our BATNA would, then we are actually better off walking away from that deal. So we need to understand the alternative so we can come up with this BATNA so that we actually know when it's time to say this is not a worthwhile deal to pursue anymore. And that BATNA analysis, working through with clients, we have saved them months and months of negotiations that were going to go nowhere, because the minute they realised where their BATNA was, it became very clear that they needed to just get out of this negotiation. It was never going to give them what they needed.
Yeah, often we invest a lot of time into the process, and so we think, because we've invested time, we have to just keep going.
Yeah.
And because why would we throw away that time? There must be a deal here, and we keep working harder and harder, as opposed to saying, you know what, this guy's just never going to come to the table.
And that's the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
So we talk about the sunk cost fallacy. We need to make decisions based on future efforts, past efforts that we're never going to get back. We need to just try and discount those. But coming back to the alternatives, the other thing that we need to be really clear about is, what are the alternatives for the other side? Because as much as we're not going to accept a deal that's not as good as our BATNA, the other side isn't going to accept a deal that's not as good as their BATNA if they're a sane and rational person.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of people who aren't sane and rational, but if we know what other opportunities there are, if we can't put an offer on the table for the other person that's at least as good as their BATNA, then why would they choose us to do a deal with?
Yeah.
So we need to have thought about that.
Yeah. And in thinking about that, my encouragement to everyone out there, we're going in with this view that we're looking at property development. So we're looking at, what buy price do I need to make it profitable? But there are other buyers out there. There are owner occupiers who want it for how close is it to the shops? How close is it to the schools, for leisure and lifestyle reasons? There's also investors that are looking for it for cash returns. And so somebody else might want to pay more than us. So we've got to look at that best alternative for that vendor's perspective and go, well, if I can sell it to an investor and not have any of this hassle of, you know, these long negotiated and troublesome terms that you're looking for, why wouldn't I just sell it nice and easy? So understand that you might be making their life hard. Alternatively, that BATNA for you could be, hey, I'm actually negotiating with you, but I'm also negotiating with next door. I've only got enough cash for one deal. I don't care if it's yours. I don't care if it's the guy next door. But one of you is going to get my money. And if you can present that, I guess, with a level of confidence to go, hey, if we're getting along, why don't we close it out? I don't have to deal with next door. And so that gives, I guess, a competitive tension in your favor.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing that springs to mind about that, Rob, is I think a lot of people say that, but it's not always true. And we could have a whole different conversation about when is it okay to lie in a negotiation or even to just stretch the truth. But that comes back to your reputation and the relationship. But one of the things that I would say is if on doing that analysis of your BATNA is not very good, then you probably need to be running two parallel strategies. One is this negotiation because it's quite important to you because there aren't great alternatives. But at the same time, you want to be actually doing something to improve the quality of your alternatives in case this deal doesn't come. So it's very often that you have to do what seems like wasting time by running parallel processes in order to get the best option for you in one of them.
Yeah, I will go to that question about the lying, and the answer is never. But I am okay with embellishment. Now, an embellishment is not a lie. An embellishment is a version of the truth where just the same way a magician can hide an elephant on stage by shining the light in a particular way, you want to shine the light on something that you want them to see so they don't see the other thing. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
But never lie.
Yeah, I tend to agree because lies will often be caught out. And the minute you've lied, and it might be something really small and ridiculous that you've lied about that completely changes or destroys that relationship. So I would agree with your counsel there.
Yeah, there you go. Lucky last, and we're still in phase one here. Lucky last, commitment. Now, you've probably got heaps to add here, but I know that a lot of people in our community go into a deal and they haven't yet got their funding lined up. And because of that, they're not confident in the ability to actually execute on this. They're wanting to, but sometimes the lack of ability to execute that comes across in your negotiations. And so you need to be very, very clear and very, very committed that whatever you're going to come up with, you can actually go and execute.
Yeah, I often say, the two things, if I talk about commitment, there's two types. One is the content commitment, which is where we get to at the actual end of the deal. And that's where we're talking about at the moment. So the two problems that will come up and lead you into a dispute if you don't think about them up front is, are the commitments clear? Do we both agree that they mean the same thing? And often where disputes come up, and I do a lot of work in the dispute side, and often it is because of poor communication where something could be interpreted in multiple ways and it hasn't been clarified. I did a mediation just the other day for a property developer who had engaged someone to clear the site. The quote said, full demolition of site. The works all get started. Towards the end, the demolition contractor comes in and says, oh, if you want those trees down the back taken out, that's an extra $4,000. And the guy goes, no, it said full demolition of site. So they're now in a dispute over $4,000. Now, we came up with a creative way to resolve that for them because they both wanted it fixed. I stepped into the role of Judge Judy and did that. But the bizarre thing was, having got a quote that said full demolition of site, the client said, oh, can we just meet on site to actually clarify what is in? There was apparently a discussion about the trees, but nobody updated the quote. So we left this quote, which was the contract, and it was unclear. So being really precise about what is and isn't included in your agreement is going to really stave off disputes. The other one, which is exactly what you've just described in terms of the financing, Rob, is the agreement operational? Do you have the means to carry out the things that you're promising to do? Do you have the time? Do you have the money? Do you have the motivation and other resources? So that's really important. The other type of commitment, though, is what we call a process commitment. And these are about agreements as to how we are going to negotiate. They become particularly important when you have quite a tense relationship and you might think, I don't know that we're ever going to agree on anything in this negotiation. Things aren't going well. And you can actually agree on how you're going to run the negotiation. So I talk about having an agenda for the negotiation discussion is probably your number one process commitment tool, because if you can actually get people agreeing on how you're going to negotiate, you get them to start saying yes to you on some elements at a psychological level that breaks down that thinking that we're never going to agree on anything, because look, we just did.
Yeah. Very good. So we're now fully prepared. It's time to turn up to the actual to the battle.
No, it's not a battle. It's a collaborative discussion, Rob.
Okay, we could do that too. So now to turn up, and we're pretty much going to try and start to apply the things that we've already pre-prepared, and go in with a working hypothesis on all of those things. You touched on it before. We've got these assumptions, but we don't know if any of them are actually true. And as part of that, we need to build trust and rapport. We need to start to communicate with them. And it's not just one-sided, Rob doing all the talking, but rather it's a very collaborative type approach. Now, there's layers to all of this in how you actually do this, but I use tools like matching and mirroring, where I'm mimicking their body language, I'm mimicking their actual language. I'm trying to work out the way they want the communication. Do they want that short, sharp, or they want that detailed? And little things like keywords that they use. If they use particular keywords, I'm going to try and use the same keywords so that I have something in common. But all of that is while I'm trying to then actually get to know them. Because if I just go in and go, hey, I just want to buy your property, you don't have the, I guess, the dance, for want of a better word, up front to get to know them and go, well, how do we actually get to find those drivers? So how do I find something in common? If I see a picture of a sporting trophy or something, I go, oh, okay, you're clearly into rugby. I'm gonna have a chat to you about that. Or I see their nice car out the front. I'll have a conversation about that. Or their petunias or rose bushes. I've got to find a way to actually get them to engage and build rapport with me up front.
Yeah, so the rapport building at the beginning is really important. And once again, judging on the other person, because for some people, they don't want to do the rapport building. They want to get straight down to business, which makes it difficult, because it is better when we get to have that rapport building. And the only thing I'd say, I think all of what you said was great, but if you're not into cars and you see they've got a flash car, don't try and connect with them over cars. It's got to be authentic. The other thing that I would say, though, is coming into this, yes, we want to start with our rapport building, but then once we've got through that, what we want to make sure is that we don't fall into a couple of key traps. And one of the biggest traps is that people go into the negotiation and they put their preferred option on the table very early on. Now, that's a trap for a big reason, is that the reason, what they're likely to do as a response to that is say no. Now, the minute somebody says no to a proposal that we've put, we have now created a new interest for them, which is to look consistent and not be foolish by saying yes to something that we previously said no to. So avoiding the option for somebody to say no to you at all during the negotiation is really critical. So for me, I like to go in and set an agenda for the discussions up front. It sounds, if we're having just a casual chat, it sounds a bit strange to have a formal agenda, but it does work. And I do it in a fairly informal way. So I might say something like, look, fabulous, really interesting getting to know you. I'm really looking forward to going through this. It's probably a good time now to start talking about what this deal could look like. I thought it would be helpful to have a bit of a structure to the conversation. Are you okay with that? Now I'm checking in with them because the whole way through, I want them to feel like they're part of this process. I'm not driving this and making sure that it's my way or the highway, but I'm managing the process and making them feel included. Once we get to that, I want the agenda to look something like this. Look, how about first of all, let's talk about why we're even here. You agreed to meet me to talk about this. I'd love to know, what are your objectives? What would you love to see if this deal is going to get across the line? What are some of the things that are important to you around this? And then I can share some of the drivers for me, some of the things that will determine whether this is a worthwhile deal or not. Once we've talked about that and we're really clear about what's important to both of us, we can actually then start thinking about, well, if we're going to do this deal, what are some of the ways it might look that starts to meet those objectives that we've both got? Once we've got a range of ideas on the table, we can start to narrow that down to figure out what can an actual deal look like. Does that process make sense to you as to how we might drive this conversation? Notice I'm putting this on the table and I'm asking them that question. They are likely to say, either they'll say yes, great, or they'll say, actually, no, I think we should do it this way. And we might have to negotiate the process of how we're going to negotiate. But what I love now is when they put an offer on the table first up and I don't want to respond to it, I don't have to respond to it. I can say, look, that's an interesting perspective, but we did say that we'd explore all of the things that are relevant before we get into talking about what the deal could look like. So can we just go back to that? And they've agreed to it already. It's hard for them to say no. So I think, the way that you actually begin that conversation can be really, really important.
You're negotiating the negotiation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let alone thinking about, and this is some of our preparation as well, where are we going to hold this negotiation? When is the best time to have it? Who should be present in the room? Preparing for all of that before we even get into it is really important as well.
Yeah. Now, the where part, wherever humanly possible, I always try to do it on their home ground. So they feel comfortable. Now do that over the kitchen table, in the lounge, whatever that. Now getting into someone's house and being invited in is difficult. It is extraordinarily difficult. And there's one little trick that seems to work more times than not for me. Because usually even before you get there, they're going to ask you a couple of questions like, what price point you're in and that sort of thing. And you go, look, I've got a range and I know what the typical properties are worth in this area. And you need to give them a range that's within the plausible merit of where they're thinking. But I won't know if I'm at the top end of the range or the bottom end of the range until I can actually see your property, understand the issues and challenges and problems that I need to solve. Would there be an opportunity to just have a 15 or 20 minute walk around the property and, what can I salvage from the property? What, is there any asbestos there? Is the sewer a manhole that says it's on the charts? Is it actually inside the property or is it over the fence? If I could just have that 10 or 15 minutes, then I'd be in a better position to give you a strong offer.
Yeah. Sounds like a very good strategy. And, once again, it comes back to the comfort, in terms of choosing that location. Yes, I see your value of being there on the property, but it also, you might have some people who actually just aren't going to negotiate well in their own territory and they would feel more comfortable elsewhere. So it's making an assumption that for most people, they are going to be comfortable in their own space and they are going to feel like they've got a bit of control. For some people, it's going to be the flip side. And this is the challenge. AI will never take over negotiation because we negotiate with people. People are complicated.
Yeah.
And unpredictable.
Yeah, not me. We're all individuals. Sorry, line from Monty Python for anyone who's Monty Python fan, that will make a lot of sense. And you're right. It might not be on that home ground, but even the ability to just have that visual inspection of that home ground allows you to see them in their natural state. So you can see what things that they've put on the wall that's important to them. You know, is it pictures of the family? Is it the sporting paraphernalia? Is it you know, their boat or fishing or whatever it is? It just gives you some context about what is important to them. Because that context to what's important will later on start to play out, because chances are wherever they move on to in their next phase of life, that important thing will come with them.
That just reminded me of a story. If we got time for a short story.
Short one.
So this is not my story. It's actually in one of the negotiation books that I've got. I can't remember exactly which one, but it's a big property developer was buying up properties around a whole block. I think it was in New York. And there was this one little old lady who hadn't sold. And the team from the property developer kept going back. They assumed it was about money. They kept offering her more and more money. She just wasn't going to sell this property. So one of the bigwigs from the company came in, arranged to meet her on site, and was chatting away to her. And there was a picture of a dog. And he said, "Oh, is that your dog?" And she said, "Yes, he's sadly passed. You know, I'm so sad now, you know, but he's buried in the backyard and I just can't leave him." And it turned out that the biggest thing stopping her from leaving, her husband had died. She actually would have moved closer to her family, except for this dog was here. So that actually arranged to exhume the dog. She was willing then, she bought a place near her family and they exhumed the dog. The property company paid for that and had the dog relocated so that she could be with her dog. And, you know, it wasn't about the money for her at all, which I think is a brilliant story.
It's often not about the money. People have this perception that it's always money. And I find that's probably only about 50% of the time. It's usually, what is that money going to enable that person to do?
Yeah.
And if you understand what it is that's going to enable them to do and the timeline that they need to do it, that's going to be a huge influence in where you're going. And so just by way of example, if they're getting closer to retirement age and wanting to move on to a home and things like that, it's expensive to move into somewhere. If you know where that somewhere is, if they've already pre-decided what that is, then they just want the cash to get in there. They probably have already made the decision they probably want to go. So that time and the certainty of the cash starts to play in. If, on the other hand, they've not decided where they want to go, then it's the opposite end of time. Actually, they need the time to go find a place, and they also need to know how much money they've got to go spend. And so as you start to go through the different scenarios of why people are moving, are they wanting to downsize and live in the area, stay near friends and family? Are they moving out because they want a tree change or something like that? When you start to understand where their next phase of life is, that's going to give you all the clues that you need with regards to the time, the certainty, the risk, and the like, that can then influence your outcomes. Have I lost you?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, sorry, yeah, just some dead air. So that's just how I find it, and so I try to make my conversations very conversational, but very open questions. So
yes,
not something that's going to give you a yes, no.
Well, and this is the thing. I always say start with those open questions. But what you'll find is some people, if you have that vision of negotiation as being a battle, the risk is that they're not going to answer your open questions, or they're going to give you very limited information because they're worried that if they share information with you, you're going to use it against them. And so this is where that preparation of having thought about what all of their interests could be becomes really critical, because now you can start asking some closed questions to check that. going something like, look, I know often, people are considering moving into a home. They're really worried about having a settlement and being left without an alternative place to go to, and are keen to extend terms of settlement. Is that something that's on your mind? And they'll give you a yes or a no, or maybe a yes but or a no but, and you're going to get more information from that. So the process that I use is start with those really broad, open questions. And I always say, don't even ask questions. Say things like tell me about or describe, that are really open. And then you go down to closed questions to confirm assumptions if they're not actually going to be forthcoming.
Yeah. And we touched on it prior to, I guess, the recording starting. A thing called the 5 whys.
Yeah.
So when you ask an open-ended question, they'll reveal a small amount of information. And if you then say, ask a question about their answer, right? So why is that important to you, as an example? And when you start to get a question about the answer, and then a question about that answer, and then a question about that answer, you're diving deeper and deeper and deeper into, I guess, the true driver that's actually sitting underneath.
Trying to get to the root cause of what it actually is. Yeah, I think it's a brilliant technique.
Yeah. Yeah. So why are you moving? I want to downsize. Why is that important to you? I'm getting older and looking for somewhere to go. Is it going to be in the area? Or all my friends and family and that sort of thing are here. Great. Have you chosen somewhere else to go? So it's just that kind of rhythm. But obviously I've raced through that process, and they could answer that a million different ways, but that's the concept that we go to.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in, I guess the throes of the negotiation at this point. What are some of the things that we can, from an observations perspective, how do we start to read the person on the other side of the table to actually interpret what we believe they're thinking?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the best thing is to try and ask those questions. I always say one of my key pieces of advice for people going into a negotiation is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in that proportion. And sometimes we think we have to make inferences about where people are coming from, but there's nothing to stop you asking the actual question rather than just trying to draw inferences. Because if you can ask the question and get an answer, it's going to be a whole lot more accurate than just looking to draw inferences. And I think there's, people will often say to me, oh, but I couldn't ask that. And my next question is often, why? What's the problem? What's the worst thing that can happen if you ask? So I think that the big thing is, really coming back to those interests and asking those questions to try and uncover things, and not being afraid. I say, to be a good negotiator, you need a mindset of curiosity, going, I wonder what's out there that I don't know. You need to ask great questions, and you need to listen really well to those answers. And that can often be the hardest part, because we're so busy listening to figure out what it means for us and interpreting the answers while they're speaking, rather than actually listening to understand it before we start getting to that interpretation and meaning side of things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. My question was more towards what are the visual clues or the auditory clues that might, so things like watching their body language and listening to their language style and understanding their personality type, that are going to give me an ability to say, well, how should I best be presenting this information to them?
Yeah, look, I think once again, you will see different signs. And I'm not a big believer in saying, well, if a person looks upwards, they're lying, or if a person does this, they're doing something else, because these are, once again, things that might give us cause. So I guess the best advice I'd say around that is, if you notice something that looks a little odd, and, maybe someone's told you, if they touch their mouth there, that means something. If you notice those signals, it's time to ask another question to really clarify what's going on for them. And that's where I'm always looking at, it might even be that they've stopped smiling and they've started frowning. So I'm looking for changes in facial expression, changes in posture. That will signal to me that something's going on, which means I need to ask a question. how do you feel about that last proposal that I put? Is there something that I've said now that's changing your perspective of the deal? So I'm noticing, and then I'm not necessarily attributing meaning to that, but I want to ask a question about what's going on for them.
Yeah, and on top of all of that, there's layers of, and important to think of these as layers, because the framework that that Nicole has actually laid down here is amazing. But when you start to put other layers on top of that, then you can go, well, I can tell from a personality profile that this person wants information short and sharp, or they need the great level of detail. I can tell by listening to their language that they're auditory in nature or they're visual in nature. So do I draw a picture, or do I tell a story? So when you start to layer those things on top, I guess the sum of the parts is bigger than, I guess, creates a bigger outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, it's so the thing I find is you can talk about all of this. There are so many aspects that to do it justice requires a lot longer than I think your audience is going to have with us today.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, we probably need to come to the third stage of this. And we've put an offer to the table. Or we've tried to, and it's all gone horribly wrong. And we now need to either go into conflict resolution or negotiation stage. Mediation stage. What's the next step?
Yeah. So look, I mean, firstly, I think if you've done the preparation and if you've started the conversation with unpacking interests before you get to options, hopefully that's not going to go horribly wrong. But we know that things happen and conflicts can arise. So it might be a conflict in terms of actually getting to complete the deal, or it might be you complete the deal and then conflict arises later on. And I guess it depends on which of those we've got to. If the deal has sort of been tracking well, and suddenly something's gone wrong, we almost need to go back to the drawing board. So one thing is, obviously very few of these are going to be a one meeting transaction. You're not going to sit down, have one conversation, expect things to go. So at the beginning of each conversation, you need to think about what's the purpose of this conversation. So your first meeting with this potential vendor, you want to go in and you probably don't even want to talk about deals and what's going on. You're probably just trying to learn more about them before you come back and analyze that information so that you can put an offer that's got the best chance of being accepted. So I think the idea of slowing things down can prevent that. It's probably not quite what you were asking, but
No, it absolutely goes into it. But I guess where I was going is once you get into the point where a negotiation is actually needed, what are some of the elements that we need to kind of unpack in order to get back to the original intent?
Yeah. So look, I mean, when things have gone wrong, it might be that somebody said something that's been misinterpreted, or often I used to use the phrase, often it's not what you've said, but it's how you've said it that has caused things to go wrong. So if you can identify that moment where things have gone wrong, or if you go back and reflect and say, oh, actually, maybe I should have said something differently, the idea is to come back in and address that turning point. So you actually want to say, look, I understand when I started talking the other day about, can't wait to demolish this place, that was probably a little bit heartless, and that's really not what I meant to say. What I was meaning was that there's so much potential here, and so you're actually going to address things like that. Without having a specific example, it's a little of a bit of a challenge.
No, but that is a good example, because often someone's going to have an emotional attachment to the house. They've been living there for 10, 20 years. Their kids have grown up there. And UK, I'm going to knock it down. All their memories just disappear in a puff of smoke. That can absolutely cause challenges. So, I agree. It's usually not, I'll say, not just what you say, but how you say it. So you need, and that, the prep work that we did at the start to actually understand their drivers and what is important to them is going to give you some of the trigger points to understand, or tripwires, I would say, to go, am I walking into a landmine here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so Nicole, thank you very much for that fantastic wrap up. There's probably a ton more that we can actually go into. Are there any last words or parting words of wisdom that you want to give people as a takeaway to go, how do we make sure that we get this right from the start?
Yeah, look, I think the number one is don't skimp on your preparation. Really look at the deal holistically, but also make sure when you're going through that preparation that it's not just about preparing how to convince them to accept your number one preference of option, but it really is that broader preparation that looks at what they need as well as you. It's very easy to become self-centered. And that preparation, the confidence that will give you as you go into the conversation will really help that negotiation flow.
The old 5 Ps for everyone out there who's not heard of the 5 Ps. Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. 6 Ps, sorry. Yes. That said, Nicole, thank you very much for your words of wisdom today. For anyone interested, Nicole is going to be presenting at one of our upcoming meetups in Melbourne. We run these meetups all the way around the country. We do them in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And you can live stream them no matter where you're located. So if you want to catch up with Nicole, make sure you, go to our website, developernetwork.com.au/events and register. And we would love to see you at an upcoming event. Thank you very much for your time, Nicole. And for everyone else out there, I'm going to say,
absolute pleasure.
I'm going to say bye for now.